The torn check. The early morning sun filtered through the tinted windows of Bankstone Financial, a prestigious but increasingly cold corporate bank nestled in the heart of Lowe's Angels. Its marble floors shone like ice under fluorescent lights, and the air inside was just as sterile, calculated, efficient, polished. Everyone wore the same shade of ambition, cloaked in black suits and rigid smiles, as if warmth and compassion had been quietly replaced by numbers and bottom lines. Keanu Reeves walked in silently, dressed not in a designer suit but a plain black hoodie, jeans, and worn-out sneakers. His beard was slightly unshaven and his posture humble. No entourage, no cameras, no security detail, just a folded piece of paper in his hand and the quiet weight of his thoughts. He didn't look like a celebrity. He looked like someone who had just come from a long walk through the city, lost in memories, not status. Behind the polished granite counters, Mr. Gerald Whitmore, the branch manager, surveyed the room like a hawk. Tall, gray-haired, and sharp-eyed, Gerald had worked for the bank for 32 years. He believed in hierarchy, order, and efficiency. But what he didn't believe in anymore was people. Somewhere along the years, he had traded empathy for protocols, and now every customer who did look the part was a potential problem to neutralize. When Keanu stepped up and handed over the folded check to the young teller, Sophia, she blinked in surprise at the name on it. This is a check for $1 million, she whispered, almost breathless. Signed by you, Mr. Reeves. He gave her a small nod, his face calm but unreadable. I'd like to deposit it into the charity account listed here. It's for a local shelter, under my name. Sophia hesitated, unsure whether she should call the manager, and glanced at Gerald, who had already taken notice. His shoes clicked sharply against the floor as he approached the counter with tight control. A problem, Sophia? Gerald asked in a clipped tone. Before she could answer, he snatched the check from her hand and held it up to the light, as though catching a fraud in action. Sir, he said with cool suspicion, do you have any form of identification? This is a substantial amount. We can't just process. Keanu calmly reached into his pocket and handed over his ID, not reacting at all to the condescending tone. But Gerald didn't even look at it before scoffing. Anyone could fake a driver's license these days. Do you really expect us to believe that you, he looked him up and down, are Keanu Reeves? Sophia's mouth fell open slightly. Sir, I think he really is. Gerald raised a hand to silence her. Then, to the shock of everyone watching, including customers in line, he took the check, tore it clean in two, and dropped the pieces into the trash bin beside him. You want to donate $1 million to a shelter? He smirked. Next time, wear a suit. For a moment, the silence was so complete it could break. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to stop. Sophia looked horrified. A mother holding a child in line covered her son's ears. A few phones went up, too slow to capture the moment. But Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't frown. He didn't even blink. He simply looked at the torn check, then back at Gerald and said gently, I was hoping this bank still believed in doing the right thing. I see now, it believes in appearances. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the bank, leaving behind a room filled with held breaths and wide eyes. That afternoon, the video hit Twitter within hours. A blurry clip, no context, no audio, just the image of Keanu Reeves handing over a check, Gerald tearing it in half, and Keanu walking away with that calm, unshakable face. The caption underneath said, Bank manager just tore up $1 million check from Keanu Reeves because of his clothes. By nightfall, it was trending. Thousands of people were retweeting, commenting, dissecting the clip. But something stranger happened. People started sharing their own experiences at banks like this. Denied loans, ignored questions, judged by their appearance. Gerald still didn't realize what had begun. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the city, Keanu sat quietly on a bench near Skid Row beside a homeless veteran named Curtis. The shelter he had tried to donate to was just around the corner. He had visited it often, anonymously, to sit, to listen, to offer food or conversation. Curtis, an old friend from those visits, nudged him. You all right, man? You look like you got chewed out by a lion. Keanu gave a faint laugh and shook his head, just reminded how far people go to judge a book by its cover. Curtis looked down. It's always like that. People don't see the soul anymore, just your shoes. Keanu took a deep breath. I wanted to help your shelter, quietly, just hand over a check and disappear, but maybe this needs to be louder. Curtis looked at him, confused. Louder how. Keanu stood, the streetlights throwing long shadows behind him. By morning, the world will be watching that bank, but that's not the point. He turned to Curtis and smiled gently. You're the point. Back at the bank. The next morning, Gerald arrived with his usual punctual stiffness, but the parking lot wasn't empty. There were reporters, cameras, and a line of people stretching down the block, not to use the ATM but to protest. Signs read, "Charity shouldn't be ripped in half, kindness over clothes, and we stand with Keanu." Gerald's face went pale. Inside, Sophia looked up from her desk, eyes wide with anxiety. Corporate had called. The regional director was flying in. And the trash bin with the torn check. Gone, replaced by a laminated sign on the counter that read, "Every customer has a story. Let's listen before we judge." Gerald stormed to his office, slamming the door behind him. But the tide had already shifted. The ripple effect. The buzz outside Bankstone Financial hadn't died down by the next morning. It had exploded. News helicopters circled above like vultures, and major media outlets had already picked up the story, flashing headlines across screens from coast to coast. $1 million check torn by bank manager. Keanu's silent walk sparks global outrage. What began as a quiet act of kindness was now a full-blown reckoning of the cold, classist machinery hidden beneath glossy institutions. But inside the bank, the air was heavier than ever. Gerald Whitmore, now a man under siege, sat stiffly in his glass-walled office like a captain pretending the ship wasn't sinking. His computer pinged with emails, internal HR memos, urgent board notices, angry customer cancellations, and media inquiries. Yet he kept ignoring them, trying to convince himself that this would all blow over, that image and protocol would eventually prevail. After all, hadn't he always been the face of excellence, the longest-standing manager in the region? The one who made sure undesirables didn't compromise the reputation of the institution. But Bankstone's reputation was already shattered. Sophia sat at her desk, avoiding Gerald's gaze. She had barely slept. She kept replaying the moment Keanu Reeves had turned away. His eyes weren't angry. That was what haunted her. They were disappointed, like someone who had hoped the world had changed, only to find out it hadn't. And that disappointment made everyone feel smaller. Then came the knock. It was a tall woman in a sleek navy blue suit, Elena Barris, the regional director, flanked by two members of the corporate legal team. Her expression was unreadable, but her steps were surgical. She didn't wait for permission. She walked straight into Gerald's office and shut the door with finality. Outside, customers watched nervously, protesters shifted. Sophia held her breath. And inside that glass cage, Gerald's face turned pale. Meanwhile, across town, Keanu Reeves stood quietly in front of a small brick building with chipped paint and a crooked sign that read, "Haven Street Shelter." Curtis stood beside him, smiling with his usual crooked grin, his hand holding a steaming cup of donated coffee. "Man, you really did it," Curtis chuckled, nudging Keanu with his elbow. "They're talking about you on every station like you're Moses Parton, the bank vaults." Keanu gave a soft laugh. "I didn't do anything special, I just reacted." "Yeah, but you reacted like a guy who's seen too much and finally said, enough. And people feel that." Keanu looked around. The shelter's windows were foggy, the roof leaking. But inside there was warmth, kids coloring on the floor, volunteers sorting donated clothes, a woman singing gently to an infant wrapped in a hand-me-down blanket. It was humble. It was human. It was the opposite of what that bank had become. He stepped through the door, instantly greeted by Sister Maria, the shelter's tireless, silver-haired guardian. "You're back," she said, her eyes lighting up. "I saw the news." Keanu smiled gently and held up another check, this time drawn from a private foundation he created quietly years ago, meant for emergency causes. "I didn't want a spotlight," he said, "but it found us anyway, so let's use it." Sister Maria blinked at the number. $2 million. Keanu nodded. She didn't cry, she just clasped his hand and whispered, "You've just fed 1,000 mouths. You've just warmed beds that were frozen for years." Later that evening, an unseen visitor. Back at the bank after the directors left and Gerald was suspended indefinitely pending internal review, Sophia lingered. She was cleaning her drawer, unsure whether she'd come back the next day. The entire building felt changed, not just structurally but spiritually. Then she saw something. A man stepped in, not dressed like a millionaire, just as before, hoodie, jeans, gentle smile. It was Keanu. He walked past the stairs, walked straight to Sophia. "I didn't come to talk to him," Keanu said softly, glancing toward Gerald's now vacant office. "I came to thank you." Sophia's eyes widened. "Me. You believed me when it mattered, and I know that wasn't easy." Tears threatened the edges of her eyes. "I should have said something." "You did with your silence, and that's louder than you think." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This isn't a check," he said. "It's a letter of recommendation. I called a few friends in the philanthropic sector. I think you'll do more good in a place where empathy isn't punished." She opened the envelope. It was addressed to the director of a major nonprofit financial initiative, one that helped women and youth learn financial literacy and rebuild their lives after poverty. "You want me to?" "I want you to be where you're needed," he said, then added with a wink, "and where bank tellers don't need to hide kindness." Social media frenzy, a new kind of viral. As Sophia packed her things and walked out into the night with the envelope in hand, the internet was ablaze, not just with outrage but with transformation. Videos flooded in from shelters around the country. Banks were being tagged in threads asking them to prove they supported real causes. Other celebrities and CEOs began matching Keanu's donation, inspired not just by the money, but by the message: judge less, give more. One tweet went viral with 2.3 million likes. He didn't shout, he didn't sue, he didn't post a thread. He walked away and still changed the world. A woman from Houston shared, "My mom was denied a loan because she didn't speak English well. That manager made her cry. This story gave me the strength to confront the branch, and they're reopening the case." A homeless teen from Detroit wrote, "I've lived under bridges, been treated like dirt at every counter. Today a man in line turned and said, 'You matter.' When I asked why, he said, 'Keanu reminded me.' I cried." The ripples had become waves. The quiet reveal. What no one knew, not even Curtis, not Sister Maria, not Sophia, was that the man in the hoodie was battling something silent of his own. Keanu had spent the last few years not just giving quietly to causes, but wrestling with grief and loneliness. After the loss of his daughter, his partner, and many years of hiding behind scripts and stages, he began walking into places where cameras didn't follow: hospitals, food kitchens, halfway homes, not to be a savior, just to be present. This wasn't just charity for him, it was healing. Ending scene back where it began. 2 weeks later, the doors of Bankstone were repainted, the signs changed, and the interior redesigned with new leadership and a fresh vision. But Keanu didn't return there. Instead, he returned to the shelter, not to deliver another check, but to fix a broken faucet in the kitchen, to sit beside Curtis and hear his story again, to bring donated books for the children, to sip burnt coffee with Sister Maria and talk about nothing in particular. He didn't need to be seen. He needed to see others. The letter no one expected. 3 weeks had passed since the quiet storm rippled through the world. One man, one act of humility, one torn check. And yet the aftershocks were still felt in every corner of the country. Banks released public statements, CEOs scrambled to publish community outreach promises, and nonprofits reported a sudden surge in donations under one phrase written on hundreds of checks: in honor of the man in the hoodie. But as headlines began to fade, something even more powerful quietly emerged, not in the public square but in private hearts. Inside the newly renamed Haven Trust Bank, once known as Bankstone Financial, the mood had shifted. The glass walls that once separated power from people were now etched with messages of inclusivity. A quote from Keanu Reeves was framed above the customer welcome desk. "Everyone has a story. Don't let their shoes blind you from their soul." And the new branch manager, none other than Sophia Ramirez. The bank had offered her a severance to walk away quietly, but Keanu had refused, not angrily, not with legal threats, just a simple suggestion to the board over coffee with one of its directors: keep the people who still know how to feel. Sophia was now the youngest branch manager in the state. But while the institution transformed, something else stirred deeper, something that hadn't been posted, tweeted, or aired. It began with a single envelope left at the shelter's front desk. No return address. Only 2 words handwritten in gentle cursive: for Keanu. The envelope's weight. Sister Maria handed it to him during the early evening cleanup. The sun was folding its arms beneath the horizon, casting golden ribbons across the cracked tile floor. Children giggled in the background, chasing each other around the kitchen tables as volunteers stacked supplies. Keanu stood near the pantry, sleeves rolled, elbow-deep in soap suds after washing dishes when she approached. "This came for you," she said softly. He looked at the envelope, plain white, no stamps, no markings, just for Keanu. He dried his hands, walked outside, and sat on the old wooden bench under the shelter's entrance awning. The city's noise hummed faintly in the distance, traffic, sirens, life. Opening the envelope, he unfolded a single page and read. "You don't know me, but I knew you once, not from movies, but from a bench in New York 15 years ago. I was 18, addicted, lost, cold. I sat near you sobbing under a streetlight. You didn't ask me what I'd done. You handed me your scarf and said, 'The world hasn't ended yet, so don't you end before it gets better.' That line kept me alive for one more day, then another, and here I am. Working now as a social worker, guiding kids away from the very path I walked. I saw your face again on the news in that bank. I recognized those same eyes, and I just wanted you to know the scarf saved more than my neck. It saved my soul." Jay. Keanu stared at the letter for a long time. The city faded behind him, his breath slowed. He hadn't remembered that moment. He hadn't kept count. He never expected thanks. But this was the real currency. This was the interest earned on kindness given with no intention of return. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in the inside pocket of his hoodie, and sat in the growing dusk with eyes full of quiet storm. Curtis's secret. Back inside the shelter, Curtis had been unusually silent. Normally the most talkative of the group, rattling off stories of his army days, his time in Memphis playing jazz with a band that never got a record deal but had soul. He now sat still, watching Keanu through the dusty window. Sister Maria noticed. She walked over. "You haven't touched your soup." Curtis glanced at her, then at the window again. "I think he thinks he's invisible," Curtis muttered. "Keanu." "Yeah, like he's just meant to move the world but not belong to it." Maria looked at Curtis with the kind of gaze only a nun could master, gentle but penetrating. "And what would you tell him?" Curtis stirred the soup with a shaky hand. "I'd tell him even the strongest tree needs a place to root, or else it dies standing tall but hollow." He set the spoon down. "Truth is, I haven't told anyone this," Curtis continued. "I got a son, lives in Seattle, haven't seen him in 15 years. Last letter I got from him said, 'Don't come back until you're the father I needed, not the man I ran from.' That was before I landed on the streets." Maria took his hand. "Maybe it's time," she said gently. "Time to what?" "To write your own letter. A letter begets another." The next morning, Curtis slipped a folded paper into Keanu's coat pocket when the actor wasn't looking. It simply said, "You gave the world a letter. Here's mine. I think I'm ready to go back." Keanu opened it that night, read it beneath a street lamp while sipping coffee from a styrofoam cup outside the shelter. His eyes didn't tear up, they steadied. This wasn't just about him. It never had been. Every person who walked through these doors carried a quiet war, a past waiting for reconciliation. He wasn't their savior. He was their reminder that redemption was a two-way street. The next morning, he bought a plane ticket for Curtis. Quietly, no attention, no cameras, just a note slipped into Curtis's sleeping bag. "Your son's address is on the back. You're already the father he missed. Now go be the one he needs." Curtis left that afternoon. A surprise at the bank. Back at the New Haven Trust Bank, Sophia was preparing for an unexpected visitor. A small media company had asked to film a piece about financial institutions and empathy, and she'd agreed only because it focused on outreach programs the bank had started under her leadership. One of them was the Human Trust Fund, a fund that allowed customers to round up their change into a donation pool for local shelters. But halfway through the day, as she stood rehearsing her lines, the security guard knocked on her office door. "Ma'am, someone is asking to see you. Says he's from Seattle, won't say more." Sophia stepped out and froze. Curtis stood there, eyes wide, beard trimmed, wearing a clean jacket and carrying a folder. "Curtis." He laughed. "Yeah, I clean up nice, huh?" She ran to hug him. "I came to thank you," he said, "but I also came for something else." He held up the folder. It was a volunteer application For a traveling financial literacy program, he wanted to start with veterans and shelters across the country. "I don't know finance," he said, "but I know people. I've been on both sides of the counter." Sophia didn't hesitate. "Let's build it together." A call from the White House. The next week, Keanu received a call he never expected. Not from a producer, not from a director. From the White House. A senior aide had been following the story, the viral check, the shelter movement, the newly proposed Curtis-Sophia program. And the president wanted to meet, not for publicity, for policy. "You've inspired something no legislation could," the aide said. "We want to replicate your shelter outreach model across the country. Would you be willing to help design it?" Keanu paused. Then he smiled. "I'll help, but only if Curtis and Sophia are in the room too." The human ledger. The conference room was unlike any other room they'd ever sat in. No red carpet premieres, no shelter basements with leaky ceilings, no laminated teller desks with fluorescent lighting. This one was carved out of quiet power, polished walnut table, soundproof glass walls, silver nameplates, and advisors who wore more silence than suits. And yet, seated at the head of that table was the same man who once walked quietly into a bank with a folded check and a hoodie, Keanu Reeves. But he wasn't alone. Beside him sat Sophia Ramirez, her hair now styled in quiet elegance but still the same gentle intensity behind her eyes. And next to her, Curtis Wilson, wearing a jacket from Goodwill and a new life sewn into the seams. They weren't symbols. They were architects of a vision that had nothing to do with fame or pity and everything to do with humanity. Across the table, a dozen federal advisors, nonprofit leaders, and state representatives leaned forward with anticipation, as Keanu laid out the concept in simple words that carried more weight than any politician's speech. "You can't build trust with numbers. You build it with presence. We don't need another institution with cold hands. We need a network of warmth, of community, shelters that don't just house the body but listen to the soul. Banks that don't just guard wealth but invest in human dignity. That's what the human ledger is." Sophia followed, her voice steady. "Every time a person is turned away because of how they look, what they wear, or where they've been, it's not just bad service. It's emotional debt. We've been overdrawing from the most vulnerable for too long. It's time we pay it back." And then Curtis, clearing his throat, speaking without a trace of shame. "I was invisible for 20 years. People stepped over me on sidewalks. But one man sat down next to me and asked about my music. That didn't save my life, it gave it back. And now I want to spend the rest of it making sure no one has to feel that small again." The room didn't erupt in applause. It sat in stunned stillness. Because truth doesn't need clapping. It needs action. The launch. 6 months later, the Human Ledger Initiative launched in 15 cities. But it didn't come with a gala or press conference. Keanu had refused all sponsorship deals, endorsement partnerships, and even network interviews. "If we make it about celebrity," he had said, "we lose the point." Instead, the launch came with a letter mailed to over 3,000 shelters, food banks, and community centers. "We're not coming to save you. We're coming to stand beside you. You already have the wisdom. We're just the echo." The letter was signed by 3 people. No titles, no logos. Just Keanu, Sophia, Curtis. Each city received funds to hire social bridge workers, people who had lived the very life they were now helping others out of. Each participating bank partnered with a shelter. And instead of security guards at the entrance, each Human Ledger branch placed a greeter who wasn't trained in sales, but in compassion. What happened to Gerald? While the world turned toward healing, the man who had unknowingly sparked it all sat in the quiet stillness of retirement. Gerald Whitmore had vanished from public view after the board dismissed him, but he hadn't disappeared. He had gone north, somewhere in Oregon, into the kind of solitude that a man enters when he's forced to meet the truth of his own reflection. For weeks, he had refused to accept the role he'd played. He blamed optics, viral culture. He even blamed the overreaction of others. But one day, in the stillness of a small lakeside cabin, he opened his laptop and watched the footage again. Not the viral clip, but a new video. One of Keanu helping Curtis into a seat at a community center, smiling as he poured him tea. Nothing dramatic, no press, just kindness. Effortless, unrehearsed kindness. Gerald leaned back in his chair, eyes burning, throat tight. He had spent decades perfecting systems, dressing sharp, building walls of policy. And it took one man in a hoodie to show him what leadership really looked like. For the first time in years, he wrote a letter with trembling hands. The letter to Keanu Reeves. I was wrong. Not just about you, but about everything. I was taught to respect wealth, not recognize worth. I trained myself to value suits over sincerity. I wanted to protect a system that served the few and ignored the many. And I saw you as a threat to that system. I now understand you were the medicine. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do ask this. May I serve now? Somewhere, somehow. I don't want to be remembered for what I tore, but for what I helped build after. Respectfully, Gerald Whitmore. He mailed the letter to the return address printed at the bottom of the Human Ledger welcome kit. A P.O. box, no direct contact, no guarantees. But a week later, a letter came back. It simply said, "You weren't the villain, you were the lesson, and we still need teachers." The cafe encounter. In Los Angeles, at a small community cafe supported by the Human Ledger Initiative, a barista with red braids and a bright smile handed Keanu his coffee. "Double shot with oat milk," she said. "Your usual." Keanu smiled. "Thanks, Rosa." As he turned to leave, someone entered the cafe, tall, older, wearing a worn coat and nervous eyes. "Gerald." He stood frozen, unsure if he was welcome. Keanu spotted him, walked over, and extended his hand. Gerald hesitated, then took it. "I didn't know if you'd remember me," Gerald said softly. "I don't remember the man you were," Keanu replied, "but I want to meet the one you've become." They sat at a quiet table in the corner, sipping coffee. No apologies. No rehashing. Just two men rebuilding the ledger, one line of humanity at a time. Sophia's vision. While the world celebrated Keanu, Sophia became the architect behind the initiative's real engine. She traveled state to state, training new bank leaders on empathy-centered models, designing onboarding systems that didn't screen out the poor but lifted them. She published a handbook titled From Teller to Listener, which became required reading in financial reform courses across several states. Her keynote speech at the National Financial Ethics Conference opened with just one line. "I used to think my job was to process people. Now I know it's to protect them." She received a standing ovation, not because of her success, but because of her truth. Curtis's full circle. Curtis, now known affectionately across the network as Coach C, became the heart of the Human Ledger's shelter outreach. He created music programs for recovering addicts, hosted open mics for veterans, and personally reunited 3 homeless fathers with estranged children. One evening, backstage at a youth mentorship concert, he received a phone call, a young voice. "Dad." Curtis dropped the phone. Tears fell before words could. He had sent his son a letter months ago. No reply, no hope. But that call changed everything. His son flew down the following week. They hugged on a sidewalk outside the shelter, in full view of the world. That photo, father and son reunited through truth, became the Human Ledger's new emblem. Not a logo, a legacy. Keanu's quiet walk. Through all of this, Keanu never stepped into the spotlight. He was offered awards, lifetime achievements, talk show tour. He declined them all. Instead, every Sunday, he walked the block behind the original Haven Street shelter, picking up trash with a stick and a bag. When asked why, he shrugged and said, "The ground deserves dignity too." He once told Sister Maria, "I've made movies that people watch once, but if I can help make a world they want to live in every day, that's my final role." She smiled. "You're not playing a role anymore, Keanu. This is your truth." The man who walked away from fame and built something eternal. The days that followed the birth of the Human Ledger weren't filled with camera flashes or magazine covers, but with the quiet rustle of something more permanent, change. It moved like roots beneath the surface, weaving through communities and finding soil where hope had long been dry. There was no flashy ribbon-cutting ceremony. Instead, there were handshakes in shelters, shared meals under flickering streetlights, and strangers locking eyes with kindness instead of fear. Somewhere in the middle of it all, Keanu Reeves had melted into the background, not because he had nothing to say, but because he had already said everything by simply showing up. He now lived in a small house tucked in the quiet edges of East Los Angeles near the hills. It wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. The front porch creaked. The garden was wild and free, full of lavender and rosemary that grew like stories, untamed and healing. Every morning before sunrise, Keanu would walk barefoot onto the porch with a mug of tea, sit in the rocking chair, and listen to the sounds of the city waking up. Buses rumbling, birds interrupting traffic, a dog barking in the distance. To him, that was the music of purpose. He had quietly sold off parts of his film studio shares, rerouting the capital into micro-grants for people with small dreams and big hearts. A janitor who wanted to open a tutoring center. A teen girl who dreamt of starting a mobile soup kitchen. A formerly incarcerated father trying to launch a carpentry training program. Each one received a letter from Keanu, written by hand, never boasting. "You don't owe me success, just stay human." He asked for no reports, no returns, just updates if they had the time. Some sent photos, others wrote poems. One even sent a hand-drawn sketch of Keanu with wings on his back, standing in a bank while coins floated around him like stars. Sophia's dilemma. While Keanu focused on the roots, Sofia Ramirez found herself walking into a storm of attention she never asked for. Journalists now followed her schedule. Magazines called her the millennial banker who changed everything, and tech CEOs were inviting her to panels on revolutionizing finance through empathy. She appreciated the recognition, but each headline made her skin itch. One evening, she sat alone on the rooftop of her apartment, the city blinking beneath her. In her hand was a proposal from a global financial firm offering her 7 figures to lead their new human inclusion division. A position built in her image. But as she read the words, her heart sank. It wasn't built to help people. It was built to use her name. She called Keanu that night. "I think they're trying to buy my soul," she said, half laughing, half crying. Keanu listened quietly, then replied with a gentle weight to his voice. "Then don't sell it, keep it. Spend it where it matters. You're already richer than most people in this world, Sophia, and it has nothing to do with money." She smiled into the phone. "What would you do?" "I'd ask what scares you the most, and go do that." She hung up, burned the contract in a clay pot on her rooftop, and the next day she announced the launch of a new arm of the human ledger called Open Table Finance, a rolling education program that taught financial literacy to the homeless, the elderly, single mothers, and teens in foster care. Instead of boardrooms, it used folding tables in libraries and old churches. Instead of spreadsheets, it taught with stories and kitchen conversations. And the first branch. It was opened inside the same shelter, where Keanu had tried to deposit that $1 million check. Full circle. Curtis's homecoming. Across the country, Curtis Wilson stood on the hardwood stage of a small middle school auditorium in Detroit. The chairs were filled with students, most of them from broken homes, many already losing trust in the system that promised them everything but delivered nothing. He held a harmonica in his hand, worn and dented. "I was your age when I lost my father," he began, his voice steady but worn with truth. "And I became a ghost long before I lived on the streets, but one man saw me. Not as a beggar, not as a mistake, but as a man, and I stand here now because he didn't throw me away." He lifted the harmonica and played a few slow, aching notes, melancholy yet full of beauty. When he finished, the students clapped, but one boy stood up. "My dad left. I'm mad all the time. I don't trust people. What if I don't want to be fixed?" Curtis walked toward him, bent down. "Then don't be fixed," he said softly. "Be felt, be heard, be whole even if the world calls you broken." The boy cried, and so did the principal. And a few weeks later, Curtis got a call from the boy's mother. Her son had started writing music, started sleeping peacefully, started hoping again. That one boy's notebook became the seed for Curtis's new program. Bars for the Broken, an emotional music rehab initiative launched across juvenile centers in 5 states. The birthday that never came. On September 13th, Keanu quietly placed a single candle on a chocolate cupcake and sat alone by the window. It was the birthday of the daughter he had lost years ago, a child who never took a breath, yet lived in every heartbeat he offered to the world. He never spoke of her to anyone except Sister Maria. That night, as the wind tapped gently on the glass, he whispered, "I see you in every life I try to hold together. Happy birthday, little one." And then he lit the candle. He didn't make a wish. He was the wish, fulfilled in ways only silence could understand. A twist of fate. 3 days later, a woman walked into the Haven shelter holding the hand of a girl with long, curly hair and bright eyes. She looked tired, like the world had been chewing on her spirit. The receptionist asked if she needed a bed. She shook her head. "I need the man who changed my sister's life. Her name was Jessica. She overdosed. But before she died, she said something about a man with kind eyes, a bench, a scarf. I found the scarf in her drawer, wrapped around a note that said he saved me. I think it was Keanu Reeves." The receptionist stared. That story had echoed before. It was the same Jessica who had written the anonymous letter to Keanu, the one that arrived in an unmarked envelope. Sister Maria made the call. Keanu arrived within 20 minutes. He saw the little girl first. She looked just like the drawing Jessica once sent, the wings, the coins, the eyes. "Her name's Hope," the woman said. Keanu knelt down, held her hand. "Of course it is." He offered to help them, quietly. No adoption, no headlines, just help, education, a safe place, a future. The woman cried, not because of the offer, but because someone had finally made her feel seen. The ripple returns. And just like that, the human ledger added something new, a division dedicated to children of lost souls. It wasn't about charity. It was about continuity, about ensuring that those who nearly broke didn't leave behind legacies of silence. In less than a year, Hope's art was featured on the cover of the Human Ledger's annual journal. A drawing of hands holding a single check, untorn, with the words written in crayon. "You can't rip what was given in love." A torn check sparked a movement, but it was kindness that rebuilt the world. In a world forever chasing speed, applause, and visibility, there was something profoundly moving about the quiet way Keanu Reeves had walked through his days, never asking to be seen, only determined to see. While others built empires from noise, he had stitched together something far more enduring from silence, from listening, from one torn check that had once been discarded by a man obsessed with appearances. Now, years later, that single act of humiliation had grown into something living, something that pulsed like a second heartbeat in cities across the country. They called it the Human Ledger, but it wasn't a program or a project anymore. It had become a way of being, etched into the culture like a sacred rhythm reminding humanity to measure its value not in money, but in mercy. Every month, new letters arrived at the original Haven Street shelter, which now served as the symbolic headquarters for the movement. Volunteers brought them in carefully, stacking them beside the mosaic wall built by shelter residents. The wall bore thousands of names, each tile etched with someone who had once been turned away, discarded, ignored. It wasn't a wall of shame. It was a testament to survival. Some names were followed by hearts. Others had phrases underneath them, still breathing. She made it to college. He got his son back. Keanu visited every Tuesday morning. Rain or shine, no press, no schedule, just presence. He would sit on the wooden bench beneath the mural and read a few letters. Sometimes they were simple. "I found a job thanks to the Human Ledger." Other times they were heavier. "I finally forgave my father after watching Curtis's story." But occasionally there were ones that stopped time. One in particular stayed folded in his wallet. "You saw me when I was dressed like a ghost. You spoke to me like I was already whole. And because of that, I lived long enough to become someone worth knowing." He had never known her name. The letter wasn't signed. But it didn't need to be. It was enough that someone had made it across the bridge. One afternoon, Sophia arrived at the shelter carrying a new initiative blueprint. She was now regarded nationally as one of the most influential reformers in modern banking, but still, she refused to be called CEO. On the dotted lines of every contract she signed, she wrote Community Steward. That day, she sat beside Keanu and showed him the plans, a national co-learning academy that blended financial literacy, trauma healing, and storytelling all under one roof. The name? The Ledger School. "Curtis already agreed to teach music therapy for the teens," she said with a warm smile. "And Hope is designing the logo." Keanu looked at the sketch in her folder, a tree made of hands with coins hanging like fruit. "It's beautiful," he said. Sophia nodded. "I'm just scared." "Good," Keanu replied. "That means your soul is in it." He didn't need to approve the idea. His trust had always been in people, not in control. That's what made the Human Ledger unstoppable. It wasn't centralized. It had no branding firm. It couldn't be bought. It was passed like a story between hearts, told in whispers, in actions, in second chances. Curtis, meanwhile, had just returned from New Orleans, where he had helped a formerly incarcerated jazz musician start a street-side youth ensemble. The man, once sentenced to 20 years for drug charges, now trained 10 boys every week, giving them not just melodies but meaning. "You can't shoot a trumpet," he said once during a live stream, "but it sure can shoot hope into your veins." Back in LA, Hope, now a little older, her curls tied up and her eyes wiser, was preparing for a national art showcase. One of her pieces had been selected for a congressional art hall. It depicted a long table set in the middle of a street surrounded by people of every background. On each plate, instead of food, sat letters, symbolizing stories as sustenance. At the head of the table sat no one. The seat was empty, inviting the viewer to take their place. "I want people to know they're part of this too," she told Keanu when she showed him the piece. "No matter who they are." He looked at her with the same quiet gaze that had healed so many. "You've already made them feel it." Then one day, something unexpected arrived at the shelter, wrapped in formal parchment bearing the seal of the United Nations. The Human Ledger had been nominated for the Global Humanity Award, not just for charity work, but for transforming how institutions measure human value. Keanu, Sophia, and Curtis were invited to Geneva to speak before the world. For a moment, everyone thought Keanu might decline, but this time he said yes, not for glory, but because the message needed altitude. And so they went. The speech that followed would go down in history. Keanu stood at the podium, wearing the same black hoodie from the day the check was torn. No speechwriters, no screens, just a folded note in his pocket and his voice. "Years ago, a man tore up $1 million check because he didn't like how I looked. And I thank him, because if he hadn't, I might have never realized how easy it is for us to shred people based on first impressions. That moment, though painful, was a gift. It showed me how much of our world operates in cold transactions. But people are not transactions. We are not decimal points or risk factors. We are stories, complex, bruised, beautiful stories. And every time we take the time to see each other fully, we rewrite the world just a little." There was silence in the chamber when he finished. Not because they didn't applaud, but because their hands were too busy wiping tears. Later that night, at a private dinner with global leaders, a young woman from Ghana approached Keanu with a small box. "My mother started a school in our village with your grant. She wanted me to give this to you." He opened the box. Inside was a single polished stone with the word Ndazikama carved in it. "It means I see your soul." He clutched it in his hand and whispered, "Thank you." The final full circle. On the 10th anniversary of the Human Ledger, the Haven Street Shelter opened its largest new facility, an eco-designed center with art therapy studios, medical clinics, dormitories, music halls, and a rooftop garden where children could plant and grow anything they dreamed. It was renamed the Ledger Home. Curtis gave the opening speech. Sophia cut the ribbon. Hope unveiled a mural across the entrance, a portrait of hands, wings, and a check floating gently above it all. And Keanu. He stood in the back, surrounded by the people he had once served. He didn't want the mic. He didn't need the stage. But Sister Maria handed him a small slip of paper. "Please, one last word," she whispered. He walked slowly to the front, picked up the mic, and said, "All I ever wanted was to live a life that didn't end with me. Thank you for proving that kindness outlives everything, even the loudest cruelty. Never stop seeing each other." Then he stepped back, handed the mic to a boy in a wheelchair, and joined the crowd again. No applause followed. Just hands reaching for each other. Just shoulders leaning on shoulders. Just a world, finally, learning how to feel again.